Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, we read, "The law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ." Grace means the power to rise spiritually. Truth means the experience of divine realities, not the application in the outer world of that inner experience. Divine love is the soul's experience of oneness with God. Kindness is the human manifestation of that love. Grace is deeper than mere kindness. Wisdom is a divine experience. Justice to all is a human law, though divinely inspired. It follows as a consequence of the experience of wisdom. Truth goes deeper than mere justice. While following the law, we should strive always to trace it back to its origins in the vision of God. Therefore, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita urges the devotee not to be satisfied with spiritual precepts alone, but to go beyond them to the direct inner experience of truth. In the 18th chapter of that great scripture, he says, "Nay, but once more, take my last word, my utmost meaning have. Precious thou art to me, right well beloved. Listen, I tell thee for thy comfort this. Give me thy heart. Adore me, serve me. Cling in love and faith and reverence to me. So shalt thou come to me, I promise true, for thou art sweet to me. And let go those rights and writ duties. Fly to me alone. Make me thy single refuge. I will free thy soul from all its sins. Be of good cheer." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. This reading from the Gita is one of my favorites. And I will refer to it again as we talk. I especially love "be of good cheer." You gotta love a scripture that says "be of good cheer," don't you? Unfortunately, I forgot to make a marker here, so So here we see in this reading the law, love, grace, and just to give a little background, so the law came by Moses. That was at a time when the Jewish people as a whole had kind of said their energy, you might say, was calling out to want to be in harmony with God and to want to be sort of his people. And so the law was given by Moses. And so what are these laws and how do they relate to us? Well, laws like this, the commandments, whatever you want to call them in yoga, they're called the yamas and the niyamas, the do's and the don'ts on the spiritual path. In other traditions, I'm sure they have similar names. They are the way that the beginning devotee starts to corral his or her energy away from ego affirmation, away from doing those things which go against the great one law of the universe, which is of oneness, of our union with God. And so they exist as a set of outward precepts, outward commandments, outward rules, and ways of behaving that start to get our energy walking in that direction. One of them is, for instance, harmlessness. We call it thou shalt not kill. But what I wanted to back up and say is that as we practice these, what we want to do as devotees, as those who want to go deeper on the spiritual path, and I think that's why everybody's here today. They want something that's maybe deeper than what they have in their lives. They want to experience something. And so as we follow these different laws, what the reading is suggesting that we do is to get into the heart of them, into the love, into the divine vision behind them. So for instance, harmlessness. Well, Jesus, when he brought commandments, brought the two big ones. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy mind, with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. Yogananda used to say that the reason why he said as thyself is because that neighbor is thyself. And as we start to practice these ways of being, that non-harmlessness, we start to understand that others, we start to develop a kinship with other beings when we resist the urge to harm them in any way. And that goes in, can become very, very subtle. There's a story in Yogananda's autobiography where he goes to strike a mosquito and then he remembers ahimsa, harmlessness, and so he stops. And his guru says, well, why not just finish the job? And so Yogananda asks his teacher, well, do you advocate the taking of life? And he said, no. He said, but the physical universe is inconveniently set up for a literal practice of ahimsa, and you had already struck the blow in your mind and heart. And so it's the heart that we want to watch, the heart where it all happens. And as we refine inside our understanding of our kinship with other people, we start to develop more of the experience of God's love within. Another one of these laws, thou shalt not steal or thou shalt not covet, the laws of Moses. In the yogic tradition, it would be non-covetousness. That sense that there is nothing, or non-stealing as well, that we only get what we put out energy towards, and that all around us is a reflection of our own energy, and that if we haven't put out the energy to draw something to us, then it's not truly ours. And that even those things which we think of as ours belong to a larger flow of life. And once we can start to become content with what we have, to become happy under any circumstance, we start to trace that outward behavior back to a centeredness inside where we can withstand anything in life and feel the love and joy of our own center. Truthfulness, thou shalt not bear false witness. Well, when we adhere to the deepest truth, when we try to not make the world to be a certain way, when we don't try and sort of shimmy around things to make things look good for ourselves, when we face unflinchingly what's in front of us, understanding that it comes from God, as the reading said, even with security, we start to be able to, it says in the yoga scriptures, our word becomes binding upon the universe because we've allied ourselves with the deeper truth. And at its heart, the deepest truth is that the universe is composed of love, and that we are all trying to find our way back to not only just the knowledge, we can stand here and say, oh, God is love, but the actual inner experience of that. And so Krishna is counseling us to this wonderful way of being, which he says here. So at some point, though, the lesser rules, the outward rules, cease to be of as much importance when we've trained our will towards hearkening towards God's will. Once we start to step into an inner understanding, then the outward observances aren't as much where we want to put our attention. So we want to take our attention or shift our attention from the letter of the law to the spirit of the law, the love of the law. There's a term in the Catholic tradition called scrupulosity. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's one of the things that a wise head monk or abbot or mother superior will look for in their children, in their monks or nuns or whatever. And that's when the person starts to become absorbed in outward rules. Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda and a direct disciple of Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here, said that he once fell into that. He got to the point where he thought that God was telling him, okay, don't sit there, don't walk there, don't say this to that person. And it became a constant sort of hearkening to little outward rules where he became more and more agitated, more and more feeling a sense of his own inadequacy and his own faults. And finally, Yogananda said to him, you are just getting so confused. What you really need is devotion to God. And that's where we're trying to go. It's not that we have license to steal and kill once we get more earnestly on the spiritual path, but it's more that we try to see everything through the eyes of God's love for us and our love for him or her. And so we have Krishna saying, give me thy heart, adore me, serve me, cling in faith and love and reverence to me. So shalt thou come to me, I promise true, for thou art sweet to me, the ultimate Valentine right there. And let go those rights and writ duties, fly to me alone. Make me thy single refuge, and I will free thy soul from all its sins. Be of good cheer. So how do we do this? And what are the ways that we can see it reflected around us? How do we adore God? How do we love God with our heart, our mind, our soul, and all our strength? Well, I always turn to the Festival of Light, which we're going to do at the end of this time together, because it shows the soul's journey through time, our evolution. Shows first the rebellion, and we have the little bird that shows us, and then it comes to a point where things are happening, and the bird gets to have a choice of whether it's going to try and fly on its own little steam, its little ego, or whether it's going to surrender. And so it hears the wind and the sky singing to it and saying, surrender to me, and your strength will be renewed. So that's one of the ways. We surrender what we think is the way things should be. We surrender our little sense of separateness, that sense where we say, okay, well, I'm better than this person, or I'm inadequate, or any of those self-judgments that keep us bound into smallness. And we let go, and we become powered, sort of like a jet stream of the love of God. Another is acting as a channel for that love. So one of the things that I've been trying to do, I can't say that I'm super successful at it yet, but it's a beautiful, beautiful practice, and that is to be looking for God's love in any situation. One of the people that I work with in an advisory kind of way has had a situation in her life that's incredibly difficult, very, very difficult, and she's had to, through this, she's had to thread her way through a lot of what would you call it, through a lot of government bureaucracy. She's had to thread her way through things that don't make any sense. She's had to, you might say, come up against or confront things that are wrong and difficult or are not helpful. And in us talking through it, because it's so challenging, we remembered, both of us, that the most important thing is to just hold that sense of love in our hearts as we go into the experience. And I mean, how do you do that when something is really difficult? Well, it's hard to just do it on the spur of the moment, right? And so what we want to do is to try and cultivate that presence all the time, to cultivate that sense of clinging to God, of adoring God, of looking for those moments when things are going well in the world around you, in your friends, where you can feel the love of God reflected. And then calling upon that love, which we experience, as those of us who meditate know, perhaps most deeply in the silence of our meditation, in the silence of our soul, when we can let go of the little ego and feel our souls expand. And we learn from that, as this woman is doing also, that our only relationship, the truest relationship, the deepest, the most lasting, is the one that we have with God, with our own soul. That's the one that transcends time and space, and that each of our dear loved ones, whom we'll be celebrating with today, celebrating our love for them, is a reflection of that divine love. They're playing a role in our lives right now, like we are in theirs, of being an embodiment of that, of bringing the experiences where we can feel that and where we can have it tested so that we further refine that love until we become channels for that pure love of God to everyone, till our experience inside becomes one of love, where we don't need love from anyone else because we experience and feel it flowing through us. So satisfying, so satisfying. So more about giving up our smallness. You know, I've sometimes told this story before, and I just want to tell it again just real briefly. I had an experience a number of years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I suppose it is now, where a relationship with someone that I cared for very deeply ended. And I couldn't let go of the love, but I had to transform it. And so I did, as part of my sadhana, I imagined this person with the person that they were then connected with, and tried to separate the personalities, tried to separate myself out from them, and also them from the experience of love. And I found in that sadhana of blessing them as children of God, that I could actually feel not only what I suspected was the love between them, but I began able to feel the love just all around me. So when we let go of that little sense of I and what I want to happen, and we merge into the love that's waiting there, we feel and experience that deeper sense of God's presence. Cling to me is one of the things that the reading here suggests. I had a time, again, years ago, where I was quite ill, and I was given a message from Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, to think of myself as a child before God, and to just be totally trusting through this experience that I was going through that brought me to confront my own mortality, such as I understood it at that time. And I just remember sitting in front of my altar and feeling that sense of childlike trust, trying to cultivate that within myself. It was so sweet, and it brought to me this sense of all rightness, that everything is fine, that all things are well. And here is what Krishna is counseling us, because life brings us tests, but each one is meant to bring us closer, closer to our own soul nature, closer to the experience of God's presence within, closer to stepping into oneness. Make me thy single refuge. That's a lovely one too. I thought about that more deeply yesterday. You know, what is single refuge? It's the thing that you fly to all the time. It's the thing that you take shelter in. And there are many ways that one could go with that, but as I started thinking about it, one thought occurred to me that hadn't occurred to me before, and that is dwelling on our strengths. Not quite sure how I got to that one, but in any situation, if we make our refuge the love of God, then we aren't thinking about how inadequate we are or how inadequate someone else is, how we're not doing things well, how we're not perhaps abiding by every little stricture or whatever. What we're doing is we're carving out a space in the great heart of God and feeling ourselves living there in that beautiful refuge. Well, I think maybe I just have one or two more things to say. One is how God can take care of us when we go into that love. There's a story of a saint who was ready to make that final leap of just giving his life finally to God and leaving everything and going to the Himalayas and going into unbroken communion. And yet he had had a wife, she had died, and he had care of their baby. And he felt this intense soul call to go forward on his path, and yet he saw that duty of his, a very real duty. Yet he kept feeling that soul call, that inner call of the love of God. And he felt inwardly the guidance to leave the baby there. Amazing, right? But of course it's symbolic for us of all the things we think of as our duties in life, our rules and regulations, but most of all our duties, our responsibilities. So he couldn't quite give it up. But he did. He followed the guidance and set the baby down gently. But he had to go behind a tree and center himself before he could go on. He just wanted to hear, would the baby cry? What would happen? His heart was torn. Just then, the Maharani of the district, the princess of the district, came by with with her retinue. And she was a woman who had everything in her life except she couldn't actually bear a child, which had brought her great sadness. And she'd been praying about that. And she felt inwardly that that was her next step from God, to have a child to care for and to raise, maybe symbolic of her subjects, who knows. But she saw the baby there, and she felt that this was the answer to her prayer. So she gently picked the baby up and told those with her, look, God has given me this child to care for. And with her heart open, clinging to God in her own way for his guidance and his benevolence, that child was taken care of. And the saint, who was in a different part of his journey, was freed from worldly obligation because he hearkened to that great love inside too. Finally, we come to Krishna saying to one of his devotees, Draupadi, why don't you practice yoga practices? She said to him, Lord, I would love to, but every time I try, my mind becomes riveted upon you, and my heart soars, and I just can't. And the rest of the story is that Krishna just smiled. So let's listen to these words from Whispers from Eternity. Teach me, O Spirit, to love thee as wholeheartedly as the miser loves money, Make me as attached to thee as the drunkard is addicted to wine. Teach me to cling to thee as erring ones do to their bad habits. Teach me to be as attentive to thee as a mother is to her child. Teach me to perform my duties diligently with my attention fully riveted on thee. Teach me to love thee as the worldly man loves his possessions. With the first love of true lovers, teach me to love thee. Happy Valentine's Day. Let's have a moment of silence.